Hi, I'm Gogo, and I've got some exciting news for you and your 1290 Super Duke Gen 3, the Beast. So I've been racing for 30 some odd years, and I've been in love with KTM and Super Dukes since 2009, starting with the 990, and always been doing this development work. And I've been doing this, the Gen 1, the Gen 2, and the Gen 3, and really pushing to get to the razor's edge of setup. But I'm also a street guy. I also love the street. So I have applied the knowledge and experience that I've got from racing to develop this race linkage system. But also, because I love you, we've developed just this simple link where you don't need the control arm for your street bikes, for your OEM shocks. You don't need to have ride height adjustable shocks. And there's actually two sets of these. One raises your rear ride height 10 millimeters. The other one raises it 20 millimeters. And what that does is, most manufacturers, when they design and build a sport bike for the market, will lean more on the conservative side of suspension and geometry setup because of the wide range of users you have to consider that could be riding the bike. I mean, you could have a 120-pound guy or a 250-pound guy. You could have somebody that's going to be riding two-up. You could be, there's so many different scenarios, and one geometry setup, one suspension setup, to cover everyone, it's very difficult. So they will lean more conservative, have a bike that's going to steer a little bit lazy and very stable, right? And a spring rate that's progressive, which is something we'll talk about in a minute. Progressive, so it can handle, a light guy in the beginning and then a heavy guy and a passenger at the end. So it won't bottom out, because bottoming out is bad. So our bikes, the Beast, it's amazing. It's a fantastic machine, and it's great for the street. It's a very enjoyable bike. The thing is, when you want to start wicking it up at a track day, maybe going through the twisties, you might notice that it steers a little bit slowly, a little bit lazy. You might have a hard time finishing turns. When you get on the throttle, and it might tend to go wide. I notice these things on the track. And you guys are good riders. I'm sure you notice the same things on the street sometimes, or definitely at track days sometimes. So when I decided to race this bike, because I love it, I ran into problems with roll speed around turns, with exiting turns, with getting on the throttle and trying to maintain my line. I couldn't do it. It was very difficult. I was not as fast on the Gen 3 as I was on the Gen 2, on the 1. We really had that chassis dialed. We knew what to do with ride heights and trail and rake and trail. Like, we had that bike dialed. I got on this bike, I was really excited about the fact that it came with a suspension, a link system, which gives you lots of options. You can adjust things, not in the OEM form, but the fact that there is a linkage system means if you change the geometry of this triangle and the length of this control arm, you can change how the chassis reacts to forces like acceleration and bumps and just weight on the seat. All of this math, there's a lot of math here, gives you the feel that you have when you ride your bike. But not just the feel, it also gives you something that's a little bit mysterious and hard to put your finger on. You ever ride your bike, go through a turn, and I didn't nail that turn. Like, oh man, I'm struggling. You have to get off the gas to finish the turn, because if you keep in the throttle, you're going wider and you're going wider, and you start to doubt yourself, thinking like, what am I doing wrong? Like, how come I can't keep up with that guy or this guy? Like, why am I always the last one who gets out of these twisties? it's not you. It's a lot of times, most of the time, I might even say all the time, it's the science of this geometry. Your bike, if it's not set up right, if you don't have the geometry right, will not do what you're asking it to do. I don't care who you are. It won't do it unless you get this right. And me and my friend Gavin, spent a year designing probably 20 different iterations of this linkage system and the length of this control arm, and testing and trying and testing and using some really, really advanced software that they use in World Superbike, MotoGP, Moto America. The same software we used to design this linkage system for this motorcycle. And this is not just for a KTM Super Duke. This is not a problem that's specific to this bike or this model. It's all sport bikes, GSX-Rs, ZX-10s, R1s. They all typically will get jacked up in the rear to improve. Because like I said, all manufacturers are kind of lean towards the conservative side. So you want a more sporty feel, you want a bike to perform a little bit better for you. This is one of the things to do. So I mentioned progression, and it can be a confusing word, and I want to make it very simple to understand. Like we talked about before, a manufacturer has to design this bike to be able to manage a very wide range of riders, right? And you only have one suspension at a time. You only have one geometry set up. That's a commitment that they made. So the problem is all the different people that ride the bike. So the result of that is having a progressive nature to the rear linkage system means effectively you have 2 different springs in the bike, 3 different springs. In the beginning of the travel, you've got a softer spring, which progressively gets stronger the more you compress the suspension. Now, it's not the spring that's getting stronger. It's effectively getting stronger. It's really the design of the linkage and geometry and energy that gets put into the shock, which is a pretty complicated conversation. It took me a year to develop this. So effectively, the spring gets stronger, right? Here's the downside to that. You lose the benefit of having all this suspension travel. At the very beginning of your travel, when there's a light load, when you're going slow, you have this suspension up here and the bike feels compliant and it feels soft. But when you start pushing it and you start getting G's in the turn and you're hitting bumps, now you're getting towards the bottom of the travel. And this is where it's really progressive. It progressively gets stiffer. So you, as a rider by yourself, middleweight, middle speed guy, are probably, or girl, are somewhere here in the travel. And you cannot generate enough energy with your weight and your riding to even get into that stiffer, more progressive part of the range because you're just not heavy enough, because there's just not enough energy. So you end up riding your Super Duke, your beast, with only half the travel, only here. You never get to use this bottom part. Or if you are at a track day and you are going 150 miles an hour through a dog leg that's got a bump in it, maybe at the apex, like Thunder Hill does, and you're going through there, now all the G's are pushing you down like this, and then you hit a bump. And you were in the middle of your travel, and now you get into that bump, gets into the progressive part where the spring is much stiffer. And something has to absorb the energy. The energy that exists on a track is non-negotiable. So you have to absorb it with something. If your suspension says not absorbing it, your tire has to. So your tire is going to lose the shape. Your tire is going to, and when your tire loses the shape and kind of crumbles a little bit, you lose the ability to turn like this. You lose everything. Now you start to go sideways a little bit and bad things happen. That's why sport bikes, race bikes, performance linkage kits we'll always talk about being linear, more linear, less progressive. So that's why for the race applications and track day applications, we designed this linkage. But for street, for OEM shocks, we designed this. So on a sport bike or a race bike, one of the things that you get is the ability to adjust the height of the shock, or sometimes a little clevis above the shock. But you're getting the ability to lower or raise the rear ride height, which increases or decreases the swing arm angle. Unfortunately, the way our Gen 3 Super Dukes come, there is no adjustment. It is what it is. You can't adjust the length of the shock. There's nothing you can do with the linkage. So when you adjust the chain, you just adjusted your chassis. Due to the fact that we have an eccentric here, a big hunk of aluminum that houses the axle on the outside edge of this circle. So when you want to tighten your chain, you loosen this nut back here and you will rotate the eccentric back until you get the proper chain tension. But due to the nature of this being on a circle, anytime you rotate this to adjust for a different sprocket size or just tighten it, or sometimes it's radical movement, sometimes it's forward, it goes a bit. Every time you change the position of that axle, you change the ride height of your motorcycle. You change the swing arm angle of your motorcycle. You inadvertently change these aspects of your bike, which is unfortunate. Some of the combinations of sprocket sizes that you can change to will raise the height 1 or 2 millimeters or lower them as much as 9 millimeters. So you might inadvertently choose a sprocket size and all of a sudden, because you go to adjust the chain, you just lost 9 millimeters. Now, one of the things I'm proudest about the race linkage kit is that it helps you increase the swing arm angle, because that's so key to the way this bike performs. Well, what happens when you have a street shock and you adjust your gearing and you just lost 9 millimeters? Now your bike is much lazier, much slower steering. You can't finish turns. It's a mess. So we have 2 link kits. One adds 10 millimeters of ride height. The other adds 20 millimeters of ride height. So just like in the scenario that you chose the sprocket sizes that make you lose 9 millimeters, if you put the 10 on, you'd be back to stock height, essentially. Or maybe you're using stock gearing and you just want the bike to feel, flick easier and finish turns better. Put on the 20 millimeter. You have 2 to choose from. They're very easy to install and they're not a lot of money. So it's a beautiful way to get more joy out of the beast in stock form.